Good afternoon, or good late morning to everyone, or good midday wherever you are in the world. Welcome to LSA's webinar series today, Online to Offline, Simplified Measuring Real-World ROI with Michael Meyer of SweetIQ, and I'm Greg Sterling from the local Search Association. And I'm very excited about this webinar because this is a critical topic for everybody now. Technology has advanced to the point where it's possible to track digital ad exposures and research to real-world actions, conversions, store visits, and we're going to be talking about that today and a very interesting methodology for making that calculation. There are a lot of different ways to do this, and historically people have relied on call tracking and map lookups and other kinds of things as proxies for offline conversions or offline activity. Those are still valid, still being used, coupons in some cases. But we've got a lot more tools and techniques that can be used to make this online to offline conversion more transparent to people. And it's important, in case it's not obvious, it's important because this is what matters to local businesses in particular, but it also matters to brands. And because these capabilities are now becoming available, it's going to be imperative on marketing platform providers, sales channels, and other people in this local digital ecosystem to be able to provide these kinds of metrics. So competitors around you will be providing this kind of calculation, and if you can't do this, it's going to be a problem ultimately. So this is why it's among other reasons, very important. Plus, you also get a very different view of ROI, and we'll talk about that. I mean, you may not really have a true sense of which kinds of ads or ad creatives are working especially well if you're not trying to capture this kind of online to offline behavior. So thanks again, and the slides and broadcasts will be available by Tuesday. They'll go out in an email to everybody. We've got the long weekend here in the U.S., and so that will we'll delay it a little bit, but you should get it first part of next week. So let's start with the first slide, and then I'll go through some basic kind of contextual information and help set up Michael's presentation, and then the bulk of this will be Michael Meyer talking about a very interesting approach to this online to offline measurement issue, and then we'll take questions at the end. So anybody who's heard me speak before, and some of the people on the call are in that group, has heard me talk about the fact that offline transactions is a much, much larger phenomenon than e-commerce, and that the real kind of action is on this in this offline to offline realm. I've been preaching this for basically 15 or 16 years, and the kitten on the right is very cute, but it's designed to represent the much tinier market that is represented by online commerce. Certainly that's growing faster than traditional retail and services spending, but we're talking about many trillions of dollars versus just several hundred billion. Next slide, please. So as I said just a second ago, really in the beginning, there was the internet, right? And very quickly thereafter, consumers started using it as a research tool, as a resource to get information, and then continued on with their purchase path into stores to buy things. You may recall that it's only comparatively recently that people have felt comfortable buying things online, depending on the population you're talking about. Really only in the last 8 or 9 years has e-commerce become a mainstream phenomenon. In the beginning, people say, in the same way that payments are causing discomfort for people, security, privacy, those kinds of things, those issues were also surrounded e-commerce in the beginning. So what you had and what persists today is this robo research online by offline or online to offline phenomenon, and you can extrapolate from your own behavior and the people around you. The majority of purchases now, whether it's a restaurant or looking for a plumber or buying a stove or home remodeling, all of these categories, finding a lawyer, there's almost nobody that has an internet connection that doesn't do a whole bunch of research using multiple sources before they make a call, before they submit an inquiry, or before they go into a business. This is just one data point among many that shows that 84%, a majority of internet users, are doing this kind of thing prior to making a purchase, most of which is offline. Next slide, please. So as I indicated, in the beginning, people fixated on clicks and impressions and other online metrics around e-commerce and e-commerce like form fills, those kinds of things, because those were trackable, those were measurable. You couldn't really track offline conversions on a campaign basis. You could do kind of tests, and you could create sort of isolated examples that X% of your transactions that were based on an online advertising campaign were fulfilled in the store, but you couldn't do it on a campaign basis. And so people fixated on clicks and forms and e-commerce transactions, and the whole online to offline world was largely ignored. I mean, it was discussed, but it was sort of marginal in the discussion because it was just very difficult to capture that. Next slide, please. So a couple of years ago, 2014, late 2014, Google introduced this concept of AdWords store visits, which relied on sort of monitoring Android device traffic, physically monitoring that as people with Android devices move through the world, and Google could compare the exposure of a mobile ad or some sort of digital ad to a store visit simply by watching the foot traffic. Now, this is done in the aggregate. It's done in a way that doesn't reveal individual identities, but it's significant. Now, Google is one of many companies trying to do some version of this. Facebook also has a kind of a more less sophisticated version, perhaps. And what Google discovered, and what anybody who's doing this kind of thing is discovering, is that when you start to factor in offline conversions that are influenced by digital media, digital ads, you see many more conversions, and you see a much greater ROI. And the ads and the creative and the messaging that is actually driving that in-store traffic may be quite different than what is driving all your clicks. Next slide, please. This is another similar kind of point that was just brought up at the Google Performance Summit, which is about AdWords and analytics. This happened this week. Case study in the UK, Nissan discovered that a meaningful percentage of clicks on their mobile ads turned into store visits or dealership visits, and then that resulted in a much higher ROI. Right? Once they factored that in, they were seeing that these ads, mobile search ads, are getting much more ROI, driving much more ROI than would otherwise have seemed the case had they not captured these offline visits. And Google, of course, has an interest in exposing this because it means people will be spending more money with them. But it's also, happens to be true. Next slide. So this is what I was saying a second ago. This is a little bit difficult maybe to decipher kind of at a glance. This is Exide Data from a couple of years ago. And really what it shows is that when you optimize a mobile display campaign for click-throughs, you may be capturing the wrong audiences. You may be doing something that undermines the effectiveness of your campaign if the campaign's intent is to drive local transactions. So the top indicates optimizing for click-through, and the bottom horizontal graph. Anyway, the horizontal graphic at the bottom shows optimization for what Exide called secondary actions. These are store visits or map lookups or calls. And what they found was that creatives and ads that had lower click-throughs actually were driving more in-store visits than the higher click-through ads. So we could unpack that a bit more, but what it reflects is the inverse relationship between clicks and store visits or offline conversion. So if you're optimizing purely against clicks, especially in a mobile context, that may be undermining your actual conversions, your real-world conversions. Next slide, please. Hopefully that was not too confusing for people. So as I suggested at the top, there's now a bunch of different methods and companies that are trying to use mobile devices to track digital and mobile ad exposures to real-world actions and offline store visits. But some of these methodologies can be quite complex and require scale and control and exposed kind of designs. And so unless you're relatively sophisticated in your capacities and you have some scale, these may not be for you. They may be more challenging to implement than other approaches, and hopefully, you know, you can find one that does either, whether it's calls or other proxy metrics, or the approach that Michael is going to outline in a second. You can find some way to convey the offline conversion behavior of your customers or your customers' customers, because this is very important. So I think that was my last slide. Advance the slides, please. Yep. So I'm going to turn it over to Michael now, and he's going to get into a very interesting approach to this O2O conversion calculation, and then we'll take questions at the end. You can submit them at any time, but we'll answer them at the end. So Michael, go ahead, take it away.
Great, thank you, Greg. Joe, next slide, please. So my name is Michael Meyer. I'm a co-founder CRO here at SweetIQ. I've been in the online marketing industry, both on the organic and paid side, for over 14 years, and I've been specializing in local search, primarily local organic search, so think listings management, and as that's evolved, for the last 7 years. In my role here, I work primarily with local, national retail and restaurant chains, and our whole main objective is to drive in-store traffic from local search. And so with that objective, next slide please, Joe, our whole goal has been able to give them insights as well as to be able to prove ROI for the budgets that they're investing in local listing or local search campaigns. And with that, you know, we have to get creative in terms of how do you measure that? What's beyond, you know, making sure your listings are accurate or that you're showing up in the search results? And with the advent of the Google My Business analytics or Google Places analytics that started to come about 2 or 3 years ago, we started to develop these methodologies in terms of how do you now start to prove that your local search campaigns are actually performing. So before we dive into that, let me give you a little bit of context behind why local search and why is it more or equally important than, you know, Google AdWords or any other ad product. Next slide, please, Joe. So, you know, let's talk about the local search marketing evolution. I think we all know that, you know, 25 years ago, our local search tool of preference was the Yellow Pages. 20 years ago, the shift started to happen to online, and today, primarily, everything revolves around our mobile device. And so for us, we know now that, you know, over 50% of all searches on Google are mobile, and local, in reality, local is mobile and mobile is local. Next slide, please. Some interesting data that just came out of, you know, the Google Performance Summit. Google released that now 30% of all their mobile searches are related to location. So what we can see here is that going forward, local search is really the tool of consumer intent, you know, whether it's, like Greg was saying, the robo research online, buy offline. You know, when we want something immediate, you know, our society is fixated on instant gratification. Well, we rely on our device to find where we can find that. So think about all the times that you're searching for something near you, what's open now, where do you buy something, or if you're just looking for directions or finding the closest gas station. Next slide, please. And this is happening at scale. Obviously, Google has, you know, tens of billions of searches a month, but it's not relegated to a particular segment of the population like millennials. In fact, 4 in 5 consumers actually use search engines to find local information. But most importantly for us marketers is that they're effective. You know, releases in the latest report by Google at the Performance Summit, 76% of people who perform a local search will actually visit the store, and 1 in 4 will actually make that purchase within 24 hours. Now, this is extremely important, especially when you're a retailer or a marketer trying to drive that online to offline interaction. Next slide, please. But what's really interesting is that it doesn't seem to be plateauing. What we've seen is since between 2015 and 2011, there was a 34x increase in searches for near me. I think we can correlate that very well with, you know, the advent or the ubiquity of mobile devices. And what Google announced earlier this week is that Open Now searches have doubled since last year. So we're becoming more and more reliant on our device to tell us where to go and what to buy. And that's a huge opportunity for marketers to satisfy consumers' need for instant gratification. Next slide, please. So this takes me to how do we measure that online to offline ROI? It's extremely important if we're going to invest any money in anything to be able to measure it and prove that it's generating ROI for our campaigns. Next slide, please. But like Greg was saying, it's convoluted, it's complicated. You know, in an ideal world, we do a search, we show up in a store, and somehow automatically we can identify that Michael Meyer searched for this, I got this 50% off coupon, and I wound up at the store. But we've actually taken that concept of online to offline and applied it specifically to local search and local listings management. You know, we've tried to make it as clear-cut as possible and as simple as possible. And the next slide, please. And so these are the different rungs in our funnel, right? So it's pretty much seeing a listing, right? Have I seen your listing? I'm, let's say, searching for pizza. Did your pizza parlor show up? You know, did I take an action with that particular listing? So clicking on a link for a website, clicking for driving directions, clicking for phone on the click to call button, right? If we perform any search in mobile, click to call automatically connects you, with the phone number. And then it's about how much of that online action resulted in people coming to the store. So not only a retail store, but also a restaurant. When was the last time you picked up the phone, called for a reservation, and actually did show up in store or in the restaurant, for the reservation? What about booking an appointment at a beauty salon or a massage or a spa? What about for, automotive or a plumber or an insurance agent? All of these actions we're able to track, and those are commence online. We find what we're looking for, and we start to take actions offline. And last but not least is how many of those potential in-store activities turn into sales. And so we took that thinking to be able to prove that, from our perspective, that listings actually drive ROI into what we call our online to offline conversion funnel. Next slide, please. So this is really what it looks like, and this is how we measure it. I'm going to go into the details on how we simplify it, but I'm also going to give you background on where you can go get the data yourself to put this together. So next slide. So the first segment at the top of the funnel is views, right? Where does your listings or your brand's information show up? So it shows up in, Google Maps, Apple Maps, even GPS for that matter, and obviously all the different local search engines, including Facebook, right? So it's when your brand's stores or restaurants are appearing, that's what we consider to be a view. You can pull this data out of your account if you have Foursquare, Facebook, Google, Yelp, Bing, MapQuest, and Yellow Pages. Plug that into the top rung of the funnel. Next slide, please. Next is action clicks. What types of activities are your customers having or interactions having with these listings, right? Now, a lot of people in local search about, making sure that your listings are accurate and everywhere. Well, here's the proof in the pudding is that, if you're calling a store and the phone number is not accurate, then this click-to-call action that a potential customer is having was all in vain. Again, you can get this data from the same, 7 sources: Facebook, Foursquare, Google, Yelp, Bing, MapQuest, and Yellow Pages. Plug that in. Now what you'll see is that there's a little 2.3% in the corner there. That's a conversion of how many people viewed the listing and then took an action on it. So we're able to see that, the conversion from view to click is as high, if not higher, than traditional, pay-per-click or search engine marketing conversion rates. Next slide, please. Now this is where it starts to get, messy. There's many different data providers that can tell you what the traffic looks like around your store. So everything from the bottom slide there is out of Facebook, where they can measure the traffic around your store. We know that now Google AdWords is able to deliver this to you. MapQuest has similar data that's available as they release this more to the public. You have what I call mobile analytics companies like Place or SweetIQ that can give you data of what traffic looks like around your store, heat maps. Foursquare just announced Place Insights earlier in the year, so now they're able to give you data around how much traffic is around your store, and even, as it evolves, goes into your store. So these are what I would call mobile providers or aggregate providers. Then you move into, actual in-store counting. So things, devices like beacons, these little blue and green devices, those are S-mode beacons. Obviously Nomi is a beacon provider, and there's hundreds of other beacon providers that can be able to count. Similarly, you have Retail Next and Nomi as well that do store tracking. So if you ever go into a shopping mall and you look up just as you walk in, you'll notice either a little square rectangle or round device with two little eyes. Those are video cameras, and they're able to measure the traffic coming in and out of the store, as well as able to, place you in a demographic, whether you're female, male, and some are sophisticated enough to even be able to place you in an age bucket. So obviously this is becoming more and more sophisticated, and these are the places you can get this data. Obviously the holy grail is to amalgamate all that data, plug it into the model so that you can measure what's happening. Now for us, it's not so much about tracking a one-to-one relationship, meaning that I searched for pizza and that I actually ended up buying. It's more so being able to show what kind of lift occurred once we started that campaign, right? That is, for most marketers, proof enough to identify that there is actual ROI on a campaign. When it comes to tying it direct one-to-one, is obviously a lot more complicated because there are very few means of tracking who saw an ad or who saw a listing, and then did they actually show up in the store. Next slide, please. Now, once we know how many people come into store, we can then take the data off of a POS system or a quote-unquote cash register to see how many transactions we have in that period. And then most retailers know what the average transaction value is. So with those 5 steps, we know how much sales are increasing based on these types of campaigns. Now let me show you how this looks in a real-life case study. Next slide. Next, great, thank you. So we did this with a family entertainment venue you might be familiar with, Chuck E. Cheese. Now what we did is, by managing and optimizing the listings, meaning making sure they were present where they needed to be and the information was accurate, we were able to take their over 500 stores, make sure they were showing up in the results, and let me show you what happens. Next slide. So we can see calls, directions, and clicks to their website increased by over 200%. So calls, pretty direct. I mean, you can call to make a reservation. Directions, looking for where the closest store or restaurant is to you. And web clicks can mean either one of 3 things in this case. One is going to the store locator page, right, to be able to identify the directions or the phone number to the store. 2 is potential online reservations. And if you're a retailer, that could also mean e-commerce sales. Next slide. So when we extrapolate that data and put it into our funnel, this is how it would look. We've had an increase in views, click actions, conversion, so showing up in store, and then sales. And then, in this case here, we would show you what the lift is, call it from our baseline to, in this case, month 5 after the campaign started. So I hope that this was very helpful in giving you ideas on how you can track online to offline, specifically in local search. We've had lots of success with this. We're actually able to give dollar and cents ROI insights to our customers on what an investment in local search looks like. And then as technology evolves, we're going to be, we're able to integrate more and more different data points into the platform so that you can get a better idea of how your campaigns are performing. That's my presentation on simplifying ROI, O2O ROI.
So Michael, I want to thank you again. This is really great information, and it's very important to start focusing on having some way to tell whether your efforts are driving offline actions and to get that sort of more holistic perspective. Is there anything final that you'd like to say to the audience before we go at least in the U.S. for the long weekend?
Thanks for attending, and I look forward to answering questions from the audience. And have a good long weekend. Happy Memorial
Well,
Day.
it's Friday tomorrow, but a lot of people are probably not going to be around tomorrow, I suspect. That's why I say that. So thanks again, Michael, and send us any feedback or questions, and contact Michael directly if you wish to follow up with him. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Greg.
Goodbye.